Hello, this is my summary of our core community from last Thursday, 20th of January 2022. Continuing to do the Gospel of John, and we're up to chapter 11. Now, there's widespread scholarly view that the Gospel of John can be broken into four parts. The prologue, which is John 1 from the start to verse 18. The book of signs, which is John 1 verse 19 to 12 verse 50, which is the end of chapter 12. The book of glory or exaltation, which is John chapter 13 to the end of John chapter 20, and then the epilogue, which is chapter 21. So we're getting towards the end of the book of signs, and in fact if you just limit it to the end of chapter 12, this is the last sign, and that makes a total of 7 signs. Right at the beginning of John, it starts numbering the signs. So the first sign is regarded as Jesus changing water into wine at Cana in Galilee in John chapter 2. And it says, what Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory, and the disciples believed in him. And then later on in John chapter 4, Jesus heals the royal official's son, and the text says this was the second sign Jesus performed after coming from Judea to Galilee. It says that in John 4:54. Now after that it doesn't number them, but I guess we can do it ourselves. So the healing of the paralysed man at the pool of Bethesda, which is in Jerusalem in John chapter 5, is regarded as the third sign, and the feeding the 5,000 in John 6, or the early part of John 6, would be the fourth. Walking on the water, the latter part of John 6, would be number 5. Healing the man born blind in John 9, and raising Lazarus from the dead, which is what we're covering this one in John 11. So these are all miracles. So you notice, for example, it goes straight from John 2 to John 4. Well, that's because in John 3 this is Nicodemus. It's also the temple goes on when Jesus clears the money changers out of the temple. So things like that are not kind of regarded as miracles in themselves. It's more similarly like when the woman is caught in adultery, that it's not regarded as a miracle, therefore it's not counted as one of the signs. The signs, they're counting the miracles basically. And the signs as well, kind of, it's interesting that in John they're called signs, and you can see, for example, the feeding the 5,000 points back to the Exodus, because in the Exodus the Jews were fed by God with manna, because they didn't have any food or anything. God provided them with food. Manna was a sort of bread, I suppose, that they were given. So the feeding the 5,000 is sort of recalls that. So it's Jesus kind of giving a sign that he's the same God that who helped Israel in the past is with them now in the present. Walking on the water would be similar to, in the Exodus there was this parting of the Red Sea so that Israel could escape from the Egyptians, and so God having control over the waters. So Jesus, like walking on the water, or in other Gospels he calms the storm, but having power over the wind and the waves. The disciples, in one of the other Gospels I think, says even the wind and the waves obey him, and that's a clear reference back to the Red Sea and the seas being controlled, or even back further to creation, where the word of God parts the waters and so on. In the healing of the man born blind, there's a sort of a sign there of discipleship, like we are all born spiritually blind, and when Jesus heals that particular man, he becomes his disciple and follows Jesus. Whereas earlier on, the paralysed man healed at the pool of Bethesda, he kind of betrays Jesus and goes to tell the religious leaders what Jesus did. And we kind of see that in this chapter that we're looking at this week in chapter 11. even after this miraculous sign in which Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead, some believe in him, but some rush off to tell the Jewish religious leaders about what Jesus has done, kind of trying to stir up trouble for him, and obviously thinking that sharing that sort of information presumably would cause problems for Jesus. So you get this sort of different reaction that some people believe and other people don't. There's constant sort of quotes from different unnamed people. Some said, oh, he's the Messiah, but others says he has a devil. So there's always this sort of controversy about how people are going to react to Jesus and what this encounter with him does to them. In this particular story, quick recap, Jesus is away. So go back a little bit. So in the other Gospels, we know that Jesus is friends with Mary and Martha, and we get stories of Jesus with Mary and Martha, but we don't know, apart from the Gospel of John, that Mary and Martha have a brother called Lazarus. So this is part of where John is kind of a supplement to the other Gospels. He doesn't want to repeat particularly anything that we've had in any of the other Gospels. So you can tend to read supplementary material. It's stuff that's done in addition to what you get. He doesn't want, like the synoptics, you often find the same account told in each of those three, Matthew, Mark and Luke Gospels. In John, he doesn't want to just be a fourth version of the same event. He wants to tell you additional material, as it were. So this is an example that we know we learn from John, that there's a brother Lazarus from Martha and Mary who we didn't know about before. So Lazarus is sick, and Mary and Martha send word to Jesus to tell him that he's sick, and with the hope that Jesus is going to do something. And Jesus, we're not told why, but he carries on 2 more days where he is before coming back. Now, the disciples aren't keen to go back down to near Jerusalem because they've already, if you've been following this, pretty much every chapter at some point there's some plot to kill Jesus, or the Jewish leaders say we must put him to death, or we must get him, or they try and lay hands on him. There's this constant underlying sense that they're out to get Jesus, and so the disciples obviously feel a little bit safer up north, sort of around the Galilee area, and so when they say, oh, come to Lazarus, come down south, they're like, but Jesus has had death threats, it's going to be really dangerous going down there. And in fact, one of the disciples, Thomas, says when Jesus says he's going to go back down south to see Mary and Martha and Lazarus, well, let's go with him, that we're all going to die, and one of the translations, it said sarcastically. It just shows you like how many different ways there are of reading a text. I think, like most people, when they read Thomas saying, let us go down that we may die with him, don't see him as being ironic or sarcastic. It's just like we're with Jesus and we'll just follow him, and what happens. It's sort of quite a brave act to go into such danger. So anyway, that's just shows you that you get like different ways that people have of reading the same text. Anyway, Jesus turns up and Martha comes out first, and one of the first things she says, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. And that's almost exactly the same words that Mary says. In Martha says them in verse 21, and then when Mary comes out, she said pretty much the same thing in verse 32. And the implication obviously is that when Lazarus died, we've had, presumably, well, it's 4 days. It says there was 4 days between when he died and when Jesus arrives. So they must have been saying to each other, if Jesus had been here, he wouldn't have died. And that, this thought must have just been at the forefront of their minds, that they were just going over and over, why did this happen? If he was here, it wouldn't have happened. Why has it gone on? They can't comprehend really why Jesus hadn't come. And so the first thing that both of them say to him is, If you'd been here, my brother wouldn't have died. And Jesus then has a conversation with Martha and says, that he will live, and she says, do you believe that he'll live? And Martha says, well, I believe in the resurrection, we'll all be raised at the last resurrection. And then Jesus says, I am the resurrection. So he's not just like another religious figure, or he's not just another believer. He's saying, I am the resurrection. Another one of these I am sayings, like I am the way, and I am the truth, and I am the light. And so I am the resurrection, he says to her. And he sort of challenges her and says, do you believe? And Martha says to him, she says, verse 27, yes, Lord, she replies, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who is to come into the world. And this is like a huge declaration to say, I believe you're the Messiah. And Peter says it in the Synoptics, and gets a huge amount of kudos for saying, oh, Peter declared Jesus was the Messiah. Peter's so amazing that, he made this declaration. And, there's so much been written about the fact that Peter declared that Jesus was the Messiah, and yet Martha says exactly the same thing and doesn't even get told off. Like, the moment later, Jesus says about how he must suffer and die, and Peter says, no, that shouldn't happen. And then Jesus says to Peter, Satan, get behind me. So following his declaration of faith, he kind of goes, takes the wrong turn, as it were, and doesn't kind of understand what that means. There's no such sort of negative reaction after Martha's declaration of faith. She just says, I believe you're the Messiah. There's no other stuff afterwards about Satan, get behind me or anything. So, it's only really the fact that she's a woman that would explain why that is not a big deal. That traditionally the church obviously has been quite misogynistic, and it's translated women's names if it appear to be in a position of authority as men's names. When a man is talked about, it talks about certain men being elders. But if it's a woman is described as an elder, it just says she's an older woman. So there's all sorts of ways in which translators and biblical tradition have tried to downplay the centrality and importance of women in the early church and in the Gospels. And the fact that Martha's declaration never gets a mention, is just another example. Here she is, I believe you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who is to come into the world. That should be like a really major incident in the Gospels and in the New Testament. But hopefully now, as the voices of women and the experience of women in the early church is starting to get recognised, it'll be a big deal again. So yes, so the other interesting thing about this is there's some language in this chapter of Jesus being incredibly deeply moved. In verse 33 and in verse 38, there's this word, I don't even know, I'm going to, eni brimisato, ENEBRIMESATO, a Greek word, in fact, it sort of means deeply moved. But if you look up Strong's number, so if you've got a Strong's concordance, or you've got a way of looking up Strong's numbers, it's Strong's 1690. And in other places in the Bible, and Strong's definition of the word is to be moved with anger and to admonish sternly. And this is again, one of those things with translators, is that I guess when, Jesus appears at the funeral, or appears 4 days after Lazarus has been buried, maybe people can't get their heads around why would Jesus be angry, and so they tend to translate it as greatly troubled or deeply moved or something like that. But I have heard sermons in which the guy, the person doing the sermon, says no, there is an anger that we experience in death. And it's quite common for people to be grieving, or to people to be at a funeral, and to just feel a great anger about what has happened. And so there's absolutely, really no, it's quite believable that Jesus would feel angry about this. Anger is quite a legitimate emotion to feel at when somebody has died. I also read that this phrase translated, there's a few Greek words, and I'm not going to attempt to say them, but meaning sort of greatly troubled or deeply moved. I read it said the phrase literally means to snort like a horse, but it does speak of anger and indignation, it's when Jesus saw Martha weeping and saw the other people weeping with her, a deep, here we are, New Living Translation, this is the New Living Translation. When Jesus saw her weeping and saw the other people wailing with her, a deep anger welled up within him, and he was deeply troubled. The Message says, when Jesus saw her sobbing and the Jews with her sobbing, a deep anger welled up within him. He said, "Where did you put him? Master, come and see," they said. Now Jesus wept. So that's the Message. And of course Jesus wept is known to be the shortest verse in the Bible. New Catholic Bible, I'm just picking the ones that use anger here, because if you look at the different translations, most of them say deeply moved or whatever, deeply moved in spirit, that sort of thing. But there's a few that use this, since the word literally means anger. I was interested in seeing which translations kept that sense of it, and the New Catholic Bible also has got it. When Jesus saw her weeping and beheld the Jews who were with her also weeping, he became deeply moved in spirit and angry. So you sort of get this sense of him, weeping and being upset, and basically just being right in that place of darkness with everybody else. Even though he knows what he's going to do, that doesn't negate the fact that he's a part of this whole grieving scene, and it touches him deeply, and he's upset and he's angry, and it kind of obviously really moves him in a big way. And obviously, just to say, when we are going through stuff, not to think of God as being some way distant or some other place away from where we are, but God is in us, he's a part of us, and he feels the same things that we feel. And if we're angry and upset, God feels that too. So it's a big, strong, emotional chapter with the sisters of Lazarus, incredibly upset, incredibly moved. Jesus, who it says right at the beginning of the chapter that he loved Mary and he loved Martha and he loved Lazarus, so he's got a strong emotional connection with them, and he's angry and upset that Lazarus has died, and obviously he's upset that Mary and Martha are weeping and upset as well. And of course he speaks and says, "Lazarus, come forth," and he's still got all these this sort of funeral bandaging, like it sounds like something out of The Mummy, where the gravestone opens up and he comes forth and they have to unbandage him and everything. So yes, a big powerful scene. There's this guy who's been not only dead but dead and stinking. They say he's been dead so long it will smell, and Jesus raises him. And as I said earlier on, some then believe, and others incredibly, kind of run off and tell the authorities what he's done, as if it's sort of like a bad thing. So the chapter ends as occurs many times when Jesus does something amazing, with some sort of plot. And so at the end of chapter 11, it's as I say, it says at the beginning, Jesus goes into danger. And actually, let me just quote a few. So in chapter 10, verse 31, it says his opponents picked up stones to stone him. So right at the end of the previous chapter, there we are, they wanted to stone him. In chapter 9, they hurled insults at him. They said, this is 9 verse 28 and 29, "You are the fellow's disciple, we are disciples of Moses. We know God spoke to Moses, but as for this fellow, we don't know where he comes from." In chapter 8 verse 52, "Now we know you are demon possessed." Chapter 7 verse 30, "At this they tried to seize him, but no one laid a hand on him, because his hour had not yet come." And in chapter 5 verse 18, "For this reason they tried all the more to kill him." So this kind of, it's been building up. Every time, the scenes in John alternate between Jesus doing something amazing, and then, they tried to seize him, they were angry with him, and so this is sort of getting more and more intense, basically. It's getting closer and closer to what Jesus calls the night. And there's a reference to, he talks about, "Are there not 12 hours in the day? Whilst it is day we will work, and when it is night, we won't." And so he's saying, like, there's a time when I'm safe and protected, and that it's still daylight. So when it's what he regards as daylight, means he's okay, his time hasn't come yet. But then there will come a point when his time does come. So he says, let's just keep doing good while we can, and then at some point, obviously, that's all going to have to stop. So that was his sort of another reference to light and darkness. The final point from chapter 11 was this question about the delay, because right at the beginning of the chapter he gets this request that Lazarus is sick, and he waits 2 days. And there's 2 other cases in John where people ask him to do something, and I think the delay gets slightly longer each time. Right at the beginning of John, his mother asks him at the wedding feast in Cana, that, they've run out of wine, it's very embarrassing for them, can you do something? And of course he says, "Look, my hour's not yet come." He kind of initially refuses her, but then she just says, like, do what he says, and ultimately he does, turn the water into wine, which is like the water. To me, my take on that is the water of baptism being, we're immersed into the waters of baptism, but then we're also immersed into the Spirit. There's John the Baptist and Jesus both talk about being immersed in the Spirit. John says, "I baptize, I immerse in water," and but the one who is coming, i.e. Jesus, will immerse you in the Holy Spirit. So to me, when Jesus changes water into wine, it's kind of like going from the being immersed in water from John to being immersed in the Spirit with Jesus. So the wine represents the Spirit, and the water, John's metanoia, the change of thinking. So anyway, yes. So John 2, it's his mother asks him to, and he initially kind of refuses, but then he goes ahead and does it afterwards. Then later on in John chapter 7, his brothers say, "Oh, come down to the festival with us," and he says, no, I'm not going down to the festival just yet. And then halfway through the week, I think the festival lasts the week, so they were there the full week, but halfway through the week, Jesus then does come down to the festival. So sort of another occasion where he gets asked to do something, he says, well, hang on, and then eventually he does it. And then this is the 3rd occasion. Mary and Martha have asked him really to come to them, and he's had this sort of delay. So I guess we can kind of think of, when we ask God for something, sometimes there might be a bit of a delay before it comes to fruition, but hang on in there, I suppose, is the thing from that. Anyway, right, so that's chapter 11, Raising of Lazarus. I hope that was interesting, and we'll be doing chapter 12 next time. Bye.